Coming up on today's episode of the CHGO Cubs podcast, it is a new year, the year of Kyle Tucker as a Chicago Cub. We've got some more minor signings, some light rumors still circulating. We will talk about it all and where the Cubs and Jed Hoyer go from here on this episode of the CHGO Cubs podcast. This is the CHGO Cubs podcast. My name is Corey. I am joined, as always, by Brendan. We are coming to you on Friday, January 3rd. Brendan, spring training now just, a month away. Pitchers and catchers reporting. Kyle Tucker will be in a Chicago Cubs uniform at CubsCon for the first time in just a few weeks. Baseball's around the corner, but we've seen little, I don't want to say little movement at all, but in the serious way since the Kyle Tucker, Cody Bellinger moves, et cetera, et cetera. So still waiting to see how Jed rounds out this roster as we start the new year. Brett.
Well, they're talking to Sasaki. Every 3 hours they have Zoom calls. He's back in Japan. Jed gets on. He has questions. They're at a moment's notice.
Sure.
So until that move is made, this is what it's going to be like.
Sure. Hey, if they're waiting around for him, I hope they get him because that's a tricky proposition. But
one of six teams, though. They are one of six teams, apparently.
Yeah.
So it's a 16.7% chance, Corey.
I don't know if it works that way, Brendan, but I like the optimism. I'm very hopeful on that. Again, I think you and I talked about it in our last episode, like jokes aside, them being in this final group is telling of their standing as an organization and specifically of the work that they've done, with players coming over from Japan. And I know you talked about it last week and just the good work that they've done, specifically with someone like Shota Imanaga, in bringing him over, integrating him into not only Major League Baseball, but America and his new life here and everything. And I think that went obviously quite well. So them being in this final group does matter. If he ends up going to the Dodgers or something like that, I don't know how many of us are going to be pounding our chest for, like it feels like Brewers-ish in a way, like hanging a banner for something that like isn't the real accomplishment, we were at the table, we got a meeting. Only six teams got a meeting. Yeah. So, but overall, it does paint a picture of the way the Cubs front office is able to pitch on these things, their reputation,
right.
Amongst these players, amongst these agents and things like that. So it's good, but ultimately this is obviously a sort of binary situation. Like you either get the player or you do not. So
if they do get him, that does reflect well, like you said, on the infrastructure, because you're going against LA, you're going against San Diego, right? And so if they end up Wolf and Sasaki pick the Cubs, well, that reflects well on just the overall operation. It's representative of the strides they've made over the past 6 years to get to a point where you may actually out-compete LA for destination signings. We'll see. I'm getting a little bit optimistic. I'm not going to lie. I think there is a selling point, though. The Shota Imanaga doubling of value after he signed with the Cubs, promoting his development as a 30-year-old. You can easily apply the same logic to Sasaki. I think that's a very strong selling point.
Yeah. And I mean, look, we have heard for years the way that, someone like Yu Darvish still continues to speak about his time in Chicago with the organization, with the fans and everything. But that said, you're going up against organizations that are going to have similar stories to tell. Obviously, the Dodgers have a long history of success bringing guys over from the NPB. San Diego as well. So interesting to see what the final decision comes down to, and ultimately if some of the stuff that we've heard about throughout this process is indeed things that are being factored in. I think at one point, we had heard maybe better in a not gigantic market just for some mental health stuff that he's experienced. And, ultimately we'll see if, it all along was just like, yeah, I get to play with Yamamoto and Ohtani in LA, the team that just won the World Series. Why would I go anywhere else? Or if there's something to this. So as we've discussed, it would be an incredible get on the price for a 23-year-old with just a really, really high ceiling. It would be a really kind of, transformative, feels strong, but that's just the thing. You look at someone like Shota, who was coming over when he was already 30 years old and having to make those adjustments. He obviously has a great rookie year for the Cubs. He was, the ERA leader in Major League Baseball for a few months into this season. But just given the age, there's obviously a lower ceiling as far as what he's going to do in his MLB career. Like, boy, you get a 23-year-old with that kind of arm and that kind of potential. It's easy to dream like, boy, how that would change the Cubs rotation, not just for 2025, but for the significant, foreseeable future here. Yeah. So it's something worth dreaming on.
I dream about it.
I feel like you're further in than I am.
I am.
And by in, myself, I mean in thinking it's possible.
Yeah.
I just have been in he's going to the Dodgers camp this entire time. It's very nice that the Cubs are invited and the Phillies are not, or whatever the situation was. But I would love to be surprised at the end of this.
I think the reasons for the Dodgers make sense. But if the goal is to put yourself in position in 5 to 6 years for a contract extension or free agency, I don't think is as binary as LA World Series or the Cubs. I do think there's a legitimate discussion of why the Cubs make sense to improve your development. I don't think it's all, Los Angeles weather and the lifestyle and all that. Listen, Seiya is back in Japan right now. Okay. You go to Chicago in June, July, August, September, it's fine. It's the city, the summer city of America. Have a good time for 4 months and then go back to Japan. Have Tommy Ottavy, have all the new infrastructure, all the new tools, hang out with Shota, talk with Shota about how he became one of the league's best pitchers, how he was not injured, by the way, as a first-year Cub, and you go from there. So I think it's an easier pitch than it's being made out to be because, LA has, the lifestyle in the 3 hours of traffic down, going down 15 miles. So, that's my pitch.
Well, and I heard that Rōki was really interested in the career path of a guy who has to get Tommy John and recover. So that's why the Dodgers were really on his. He was like, I want a team to destroy my arm in an effort to try to maximize cheap innings.
I mean, put us in the room. We can make the pitch.
Yeah. I will say though, I think because and I know this, but because you said like the lifestyle and all of that, like if I'm him, the pitch is like I idolize Shohei Ohtani, and me, if I'm Rōki, me, Ohtani, and Yoshinobu Yamamoto are going to be the like Japanese Beatles of America.
You just said he doesn't want that type of hot media attention or that pressure.
Sure, but I think it would be easy to
thrust into the biggest one.
Yeah, no, I hear you, but I think if you were his agent, Joe Wolf, you might be spinning that in a like, don't think of the mental anguish part of it. Think of the money part of it and the celebrity part of it.
I mean, a lot of that
maybe
stuff
he doesn't want. We'll see.
A lot of that stuff is complimentary. It's how do I make the most money and have the biggest contract in 5 years? That's what's going to come down to. It's going to be the Cubs pitching infrastructure versus the Dodgers, the Padres, and whomever is involved. That's what it's going to be. And this other stuff is likely, I don't know, but likely is complementary and secondary to that.
When watch him go to like San Diego, we're talking about, obviously we're talking about the Cubs, but everybody else is talking about LA. He's like, no, San Diego was the perfect middle ground. Yeah.
San Diego's too cold, man. It's colder than Chicago.
When I did add, we're talking about LA I added. I never know how to do this on the camera. I don't know
I
which
know it's all
direction
messed
the
up.
camera is, but pertinent to the conversation. LA's pitching coach behind me now.
Oh,
So,
is that Marquee Mark? Is that what that
yes.
says? Marquee
Yeah.
Mark. Oh, was that NLCS when he beat Maddox?
It was.
Oh,
Yeah.
look at that. Okay.
Yeah. I have that
Mark Pryor.
newspaper. Saved it.
Man, what if one day Mark Pryor does come back? What if Tommy Hotovy gets a promotion and Mark Pryor
I
comes
would
on
have
back?
fired David Ross to hire Mark Pryor. At the time, Craig Counsell wasn't on my radar, so that was the hypothetical move I was interested in.
Would you fire Craig Counsell for Mark Pryor?
The 12-year-old version of me would.
I mean, I actually might do that just for my current self right now. That'd be fun.
Although I do feel like I even, obviously seeing him in a Dodgers uniform and walking to the mound and whatever.
He's not the same guy. That Mark Pryor does not exist
it's like I don't. It's hard, I feel like I get like war flashbacks when I see Mark Pryor. Like him being the Cubs manager might be a lot for me to take in.
Yeah.
Then he has to go out to the mound. He's pointing at things. It's especially really like bringing up a lot.
A night game at Wrigley with the Auburn Ivy in the background.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah,
I don't know if I can appropriately handle that, but we'll see. I think bringing it back to kind of how the Cubs adjust from this, I think it's one of those interesting things. It's beneficial that the cost is not going to be as large as some of these other contracts that we've seen in the past. I mean, even Yamamoto, a good example, because that felt a lot more like something where if you're really in on this and you really think you have a chance on this, you kind of can't proceed with your off season until you know that answer. That was the case with like someone like Shohei Ohtani. And even when teams were, in on someone like Aaron Judge a few years ago, like if you're the San Francisco Giants and whether they believed they were as close as John Heyman's, fake reporting was suggesting, you still have to adjust for, hey, we offered someone a 10-year, like $800 million contract. If they happen to accept it, we can't have spent, a bunch of that money elsewhere because we want that deal to happen and it's out there. This would be a much smaller deal. So I don't think that Jed Hoyer and the Cubs front office would have to put things on hold or be so like, well, we have to wait till January 15th till we know the answer on Rōki Sasaki. But at the same time, Brendan, like we know they're not working with a ton of payroll flexibility. You're dwindling in the options of who's available as certain guys come off the market, things like Corbin Burns going to the Diamondbacks, even though, we never really heard much smoke there with the Cubs. It feels like a slightly weird middle ground in that it's not this massive contract that you have to wait on. But if you're the Cubs, like how many innings would you have available if you were to go and say, hey, we're getting nervous. We're going to go sign Jack Flaherty right now. You'd be thrilled if you then got Rōki Sasaki too. But would you make those moves in tandem if you knew they were being made in tandem? So it's an interesting spot to think about how Jed in this front office might be approaching really wanting something and investing in this pitch, but needing to know like, well, we still have to improve the team, whether he chooses the Cubs one way or the other.
And it's where they spend the money. So you had, Jack Flaherty as the example. Nick Pivetta is going to be another example. Both those guys are around 20 million AAV at the minimum and likely 25-ish or more. If they sign Sasaki, well, then that money can be spent on the bullpen. You can go after, Hoffman. You can go after more expensive relievers. And once you have that information about your rotation stability, then those decisions become easier to make. So at the same time, while they're not probably stalling themselves from making other moves, I do think they probably are trying to understand their likelihood. Yeah. And it doesn't mean they're going to prohibit moves from being made. But then again, given how the market is shrinking, but also there's several targets available, they may end up waiting. And that may be what Jed ends up risking to get the best case scenario, but we'll see.
Yeah. So I want to hit our first ad break here, but when we come back, kind of taking a look at, we've talked about this stuff in the past weeks, but like, let's lay out what are the positions we feel like the Cubs absolutely have to address to finish off this offseason? Obviously, a massive move that at the time, I think when it started, took a lot of us by surprise a little bit in getting a legitimate slugging superstar in Kyle Tucker. They made a lot of, solid, call them minor depth type moves, things like that, obviously trading Cody Bellinger. But what are the positions they need to address, in how many, in what quantity, and where that sits, with how this offseason is positioned, who's on the board, who's off the board, and how Jed Hoyer can kind of really bring this home. And I say that, Brendan, because it feels like, you and I even talked about this when looking at some of the projections, it feels like the Cubs are close, right? Not to being at the level the Dodgers are, or, projected in that same tier as a team like that, but close to, like, this is a good team. This is the favorite in the NL Central. Like, they got to where we needed them to be, but it feels like they're just short of that now. And this, like, 3 to 4 week, inaction period, call it, I can feel people getting a little nervous. Like, they traded Bellinger, they have the money. Why, when are they going to spend the money? Where's it going? Like, come on, like, let's go. So let's dive into that and see how Jed finishes off this offseason, Rōki Sasaki or not, after we come back from our first ad break here.
Okay, game time. Holiday season's over. Bowl season's here. NFL playoffs are coming around the corner. You want to go to one of those games? Game Time is your place to get those tickets. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for those events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets to find the best value. They have curated deals, so it makes it easier than ever to find the best price on great seats. You can also see, where you're going to be sitting. That's my favorite feature. You can go to the Game Time app. You're like, you know what? Where are these seats? I never could do this before in other apps. That is why my friends use Game Time. It's also why I use Game Time. So right now, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CHGO for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CHGO for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Empire. With Empire today, you get shop at home convenience, the right product for your needs, quick and professional installation, and that famous low price guarantee. Empire today is the best place to get new flooring. So, of course, they have copycats, but Empire cannot be beaten on quality, service, speed. So competitors advertise those low quality products that Empire will not carry. Empire will not promise the lowest prices, because anyone who does that is putting flooring in your home that they would not put in their own home. Empire's philosophy is to help you find what you need, not overwhelm you with thousands of choices and substitutes. What they leave out of their selection is as important as what they put in. Empire's products exhaustively comes through thousands of product samples each year to find the perfect style. So schedule a free in-home estimate today. All listeners can receive a $350 off discount when they use the promo code CHGO. Restrictions do apply. See empiretoday.com/CHGO for details.
All right, Brendan. So let's just take a, status check here. On Thursday, it was announced that Josh Rojas was signing with the White Sox. So a lot of people saw that in Chicago. They got the team wrong, though. Kind of saw him being talked about a lot as a good option, potentially utility man depth, the kind of landing spot, if you will, for Matt Shaw, someone to kind of ease the pressure off there. But that is off the board. There is a light, let's call it Alex Bregman mention going around, but that does sound like, and it's not even the first time I mentioned this in this podcast. It does sound like some agent work from John Heyman.
Yes, it does.
Trying to drive the price up elsewhere, which is, was funny too, because I think it was not long after we got off the air last Friday that Teoscar Hernandez went back to the Dodgers. And we had we certainly weren't the only people to discuss this, but we had just discussed how it felt like the Seiya stuff kept coming up from LA. It had come up earlier in the day before we were recorded. And we came on and were like, this has got to just be pressure from the Dodgers on Teoscar Hernandez. And lo and behold, who felt the pressure from the Dodgers later that evening? Teoscar Hernandez. Funny how that works. So this feels pretty similar. Ken Rosenthal at one point mentioned, I think, a few weeks ago after the Kyle Tucker move, like that this, Bregman would make sense for the Cubs. They have an opening at third base after trading Paredes. And I think that was the time that Ken Rosenthal had used the line, like, if Tom Ricketts wants to act like a big market team instead of hoarding money, or whatever he said in the article. So it's not like an insane suggestion, but it just feels like we haven't heard anything about that. And now you get this like outside possibility. If my understanding of the segment on his show is correct, like Heyman wasn't even saying there was like conversations.
It was his own opinion.
It was just like, this could make sense. And it's like, yeah, this just feels like an agent doing work through a reporter to kind of drum up this market that maybe is or isn't there. What else has gone on? The Cubs bringing in a veteran pitcher in Caleb Thielbar. Is that how we're going to pronounce that?
We're going to go Thielbar.
No.
Thielbar.
No.
I believe it's
No
Thielbar. Listen, you got a 50-50 chance of you and I getting these pronunciations right. I wouldn't
usually pronounce that H, Brendan, in words like that.
I went to YouTube and that's what they said, Corey. Thielbar.
Oh, well, if it's on YouTube. No, I have no idea. You could Caleb. I'm going to call him Caleb.
Yeah,
there's only one Caleb in Chicago, right? So it's fine.
Yeah, you're fine. For now.
And so I do want your thoughts there. I know that was an interesting signing, just because it is a major league contract for a guy who is 38 years old. But the numbers pretty solid, and for a low cost contract. I do want your thoughts on that, what he can bring to the bullpen. And then I think that pairs well. All those moves kind of lead us into the next discussion, which is what is left for the Cubs to do. And I think shoring up what the plan at third base is one of those things. Even if it is a Matt Shaw job to lose, which I don't think that's how they're going to enter the season with that explicit kind of frame of mind. Do they get veteran help? Are they looking at who is it, Brujan, that they got from the Marlins? Brujan, who has some really awful numbers, former top prospect, but some truly awful numbers. Who they got from Matt Mervis. Is that the plan? Is there a better plan? Or is it something like Alex Bregman, where they're going to say, actually, Matt Shaw is going to have to earn these plate appearances across the diamond. We're going out and getting like a legit, top free agent class third baseman. And then as far as the bullpen, you add I'm going with Thielbar until I'm correct.
You do what you want.
I don't like the H in there.
No one's forcing you.
Where does that leave the bullpen? What types of arms do they need to round out this bullpen? And again, pairing it with the Sasaki discussion, are they in the market for another starter? Are they going to trade for another starter? What do they need to what does Jed need to do to realistically finish off this offseason, kind of paired with all of the recent news and rumblings rolled into one?
They have right now $50 million in theory freed up before the first tier of the luxury tax. So under the assumption, I'm thinking they will spend around 25-30 million. That means they go into the opening day around 20-15 million underneath that first tier. They spend more money, maybe it's 10 million. So when I say I like the moves they've made for the bullpen, it means I'm assuming they solidify that bullpen with greater investments in free agents or the trade market. It does not mean that when I say I like the moves they made, that I like the moves they made going into the year as the only moves. That's not what I mean. So with that said, I like the Caleb Thielbar signing. And
Caleb T, we'll call him.
Caleb T. And here's why. He is going to enter the season with a poor 2024 in his back pocket, but he's going to enter the season with 3 years previously of high quality run prevention for 3 straight years. And he's someone who has unique stuff. when you look at who the Cubs have signed so far, it's him, it's other minor league depth pieces, it's projectable talents through trades with, for instance, Eli Morgan. So they've so far acquired Eli Morgan, Caleb Thielbar, Cody Petit, Rob Sestrzyny, former World Series champion Rob Sestrzyny, Ben Heller, and Phil Bickford. Those are a handful of guys that on the surface, they do not look like they're projectable guys. And that is absolutely true. Each one of those guys has a unique feature. And specifically, 4 of those 6 guys have one pitch type that is unique enough that it falls outside the normal range for any pitch types in Major League Baseball. What those pitches are, for Caleb, it's going to be his curveball. For Cody Petit, it's going to be the sweeper. For Rob Sestrzyny, it's going to be his cutter. For Ben Heller, it's going to be a splitter. So those are 4 pitch types that really only 5% of pitchers have something somewhat similar. It's unique. For the Cubs to be good, they have to outproduce Milwaukee's, I don't want to say dumpster diving to take offense at these guys, but they have to outproduce their dumpster diving. It's part of the process. If you outproduce Milwaukee's fringe development value and you complement that with high investment in back end bullpen, that's how you take over the division. So I like those bets, but I also want them to spend more money. And assuming that's the case, I like what they've done so far.
Yeah, I think I understood the reaction to this. That's why I was kind of saying like this period after the Bellinger Tucker stuff that hasn't had real like significant moves in it. I understand why people are kind of like, I don't want to say freaking out. Everybody's always freaking out on Cubs Twitter, but expressing a little bit of concern. Especially when, we talk about the budget, we don't know what it is exactly. We assume that first threshold, somewhere under it, is where they'd like to position themselves, as continually pathetic as that remains. And then you see them giving out what I think it was 2.75.
2.75.
Yeah. To Caleb T. I what I love too is there's got to be like one person that is so upset that we just don't know how to say that word.
Of course.
What is wrong with these idiots? Like
don't
something like
sports?
that. Yeah. And they see them giving out 2.75 on what is limited budget left to spend to a 38-year-old, who has had
coming
some
off a
solid
5.3 ERA last year.
And you can tell us more, but like the under the hood stuff and some of the splits in previous years, like this is totally fine depth to have. And if we've learned anything over the last few years watching this Cubs bullpen, is that you can truly never have enough pitching depth. Guys are going to get hurt. Guys are going to go through periods of being ineffective. Guys that were you're banking on to repeat a performance are not going to repeat that performance. We see it year in and year out. You need as many arms that you can use as humanly possible. And one of the greatest advantages, whether people, believe it or not, with how many games they blew, like in, early in 2024, like one of Craig Counsell's greatest strengths is specifically working with what you just laid out. Like these guys may not be great, but this pitch can be great. And this is how I can use that to get outs against this hitter. Or I need a ground ball, I'm going to this guy. And that's one of the reasons you made him the highest paid manager in baseball, is to utilize, and, you said dumpster diving in Milwaukee, but I think it's just a different way of saying, like, you are routinely spending $100 million more than the Brewers, something like that. And they are running over you. Like getting Kyle Tucker is the type of move the Chicago Cubs need to be making. And you need players like that. But at the end of the day, Kyle Tucker is not the reason that you are routinely getting outclassed by a team spending $100 million less than you. It is also not just in these little fringe things and getting the most value out of it, but that's a huge part of it. If you are able to close that gap, everybody has the same ability to succeed in those types of moves. No one has an advantage there. You can't flex your muscle in terms of money in getting, and now, like, the Dodgers can go pay some guy who doesn't deserve $20 million because they'll just defer it to 2095 and maybe he chooses there. But in terms of actually getting that value out, that's coaching, that's front office philosophies, that's teachings and technology.
And necessary.
Yeah. It's every team, whether they are spending $300 million a year on their payroll or $50 million a year on their payroll, has the same ability to sign some guy who was in indie ball 2 years ago and turn him into a major league reliever. That's all about infrastructure and coaching and technology and the people you have in that building, the brain power and teachability that you have in there. And the Cubs need to be better about that. So that's a long-winded way of saying, like, I'm with you. I like these moves, and the Cubs need to be better about this stuff. And the more guys like this you bring in, as the Cubs have continued to show better results in terms of their development, their pitching infrastructure, things like that, like, I'm into it, and they need to be better about it. But I agree with the sentiment. They do need to bring in some more proven stuff, and whether that's going out and doing the Tanner Scott thing, something like that, and really going
Jeff
for like
Hoffman.
like the higher points in this market. We'll see if that's the route that they go. But I think when you've had bullpen problems for the last 2 years, you have to have a better, like, this is how we addressed it, than the list of guys that you just put out there. Even as I agree, the Cubs, you need as many arms as you can, and they have to be better about getting results from some of those guys.
Yeah. All right. Quick ad break. Come back around. I do want to just show a quick graph on Caleb T, and then we'll move on. And also, before we move on there, also lay out where their bullpen currently stands, just to give more insight to this, because it is informative when you see everything laid out. So ad break here. First one from CHSN, Chicago Sports Network, the new home of the Blackhawks, Bulls, and White Sox games. We are sponsored by CHSN. CHSN will broadcast more than 300 live games per year across the Blackhawks, Bulls, and White Sox, and they will feature a full lineup of original Chicago-focused sports content. They're always Chicago-based, Chicago-built, and Chicago to the core. And they're bringing it to every corner of Chicago, across our 77 neighborhoods and beyond. As CHSN, Chicago comes first. Visit chsn.com for more info on how to watch the Bulls, Hawks, and Sox games all season long. ComEd. ComEd can help businesses save money by becoming more energy efficient.
I didn't know ComEd did that, Brendan.
Yep. The energy efficiency program can help find up to 35% in energy savings.
Wow. So what does a business have to do?
Just sign up for a free facility assessment at comed.com/biz.
Well, if it's that easy, why aren't more businesses doing it, Brendan?
Maybe they forgot the website.
Oh, well, it's comed.com/biz. comed.com/biz. comed.com/biz.
That should do it. Terms and conditions do apply. Offers are subject to change. Actual savings will vary by customers' energy usage and rate. The ComEd Energy Efficiency Program is funded in compliance with state law. Okay, before I turn it back to you, I do think this is a little informative of where the Cubs picture is in terms of how bullpens change. So right now, if you go to Fangraph's depth charts, here's your current inning allotment for their existing bullpen. Porter Hodge was not in the picture entering 2024. Nate Pearson was not in the organization. Tyson Miller was not in the organization. Eli Morgan, not in the organization. Caleb T, not in the organization. Cody Petit, not in the organization. Rob Zasiersny, not in the organization, right? So those are your top guys. So when we talk about...
A couple of the guys were in the organization several years ago, though. So,
that's true. Tyson Miller and World Series champion Rob Z. But I bring this up because this is how fast evolving bullpens are. So when we talk about, oh, you want to spend more money on the bullpen, yes, that's true. But we can also point back to recent history where that was not to the Cubs' benefit. You look at Hector Neris as one example. So those guys need a hit. Not everyone needs to hit. If that's the case, then they're going to be the best bullpen in the league. But a few of them hitting would be so important. And in comparison, you can look at Milwaukee. Brian Hudson, former Cubs farmhand, big, tall lefty, had like a 1.8 ERA. McGill from Milwaukee, he basically substituted for Devin Williams for the majority of the year, another former Cubs pitcher. So when Ben Heller then gets signed to a minor league contract after a year in Pittsburgh with 12 innings and a 12 ERA rounding up, the obvious response is, well, what is going on? Then you look at Ben Heller and you see, oh, okay, well, his splitter, the next nearest closest splitter is Devin Williams. His splitter moves like a Frisbee inside a right-handed bat. And there's only one guy who has a similar splitter, and that's that former Milwaukee closer. Okay, well, that makes sense. Then you start looking at Cody Petit, who, again, Cody Bellinger in a vacuum, not a great deal. But his sweeper has 18 inches of horizontal break. Okay, well, that's pretty interesting. It's not exactly like Hayden Wesneski's, but it was one of the reasons why they traded Scott Efros for Hayden Wesneski many years ago. This is what they're trying to accomplish. You rapidly evolve your bullpen. You keep up with the natural ebb and flow of pitchers, but you make as many good gambles as possible, and you try to mirror that with signings that do not turn out like Hector Neris. But if they do, well, then you have this potential reserve waiting right there, like Milwaukee has done in the past few years.
Yeah, I would be pretty pleased, I think, with the state of the bullpen if they added, I would say, 2 like reliable guys. And like I said, it doesn't have to be a Tanner Scott at the top of the market or, whatever, but I'm fine with the depth stuff. But I was sort of starting to say that I think I understood the reaction even the other day to the signing, where it's like, well, almost $3 million to a guy who's 38. If you guys are penny pinching toward the first tier of the luxury tax, like, okay, like I didn't really have that reaction. I think it's fine, but I do, again, that's where the, like, it'd be nice if maybe the bigger moves, if there are some remaining, even if they're not at the scale of Kyle Tucker, obviously, because not much is, because he's one of the best players in baseball, and he's a Chicago Cub, by the way.
Yeah, right fielder, correct.
I understand why people are a little uneasy with it. I understand why people would say, like, this team doesn't have the best track record with signing some of these older guys that at the time we might have said, oh, that's just a handful of millions of dollars, like whatever. And then, come a year later, you and I are ready to, like, go to jail over the person and those, $5 million that they could have been spending elsewhere. So I think 2.75, I think, I was reading the stuff that you were writing and other people were talking about with Thielbar, and I think it's fine. Again, I think you need so many arms. You need the depth. Like, let Tommy Hotovy cook a little bit with these, more interesting specific pitches and profiles that these guys have. But I understood, where people are like, all right, like, but you did trade for Kyle Tucker. You moved Bellinger out. You got the money. I'd feel better if it wasn't going to a 38-year-old, with whatever track record. I understand why that's a popular sentiment, or at least a sentiment that some folks have.
I guarantee you, if they sign someone like Jeff Hoffman, who's right now maybe projected for 3 years, 40 million, 4 years, 44, 45 million, there's going to be a similar sect of fans who are like, what is going on? They're going to give 3+ years for a reliever who's only thrown 150 innings in the last 3 years. I don't want that. I don't want my 13 million AAV going to a reliever like that. So it's this weird balance. So,
well, and bullpens are tough. It's a thankless job. It's the type of thing where, we would look at some of the bigger contracts for some of the more reliable guys and say, oh man, like, I don't want to give that contract to a reliever.
Yeah.
But then again, you look at the cheaper stuff, and sometimes it is hard. I liked the way you laid out kind of how different the bullpen looked from year to year, because I do think that is very useful in just reminding, like, in some of these cases, the Cubs need to, let's say you're talking about a guy that has a good splitter. They need to find a way to make that splitter work for now for one season.
That's it.
Get outs as part of this bullpen
40 innings
for one season. And if there's another step that needs to be made, if guys adjust and you have the guy in the organization for longer, that's a problem for Tommy Hotovy. That's next year's Tommy Hotovy's problem, So I think it's a good exercise and just reminding relievers are very volatile. Like guys that have a ton of success one year may never find that success again. We see all the time guys that, are used to be good starters or were failed starters entirely that are now really good bullpen pieces, and guys that have done both roles and succeeded or failed or everything. It's a very volatile thing. So I would like to see them add more reliability, and just guys, not even just name value, but just guys that have that track record of being reliable, guys that Craig Counsell can lean on and trust, and they'll give a good return on that investment.
One last thought before you move on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I try not to get too worked up.
I know.
It's a very volatile thing. And, I think there's more to go for them to try to give them as much coverage as they need. But I try not to get too worked up in how they're spending that money at this point. And look, if they don't sign anybody else the rest of the offseason and they're talking about the payroll, then yeah, we can go back and say hey, you gave this guy $3 million. You needed to give this guy $3 million. And now you're not spending their money. But I don't expect that that's how the rest of the offseason is going to go.
The timing is important too, because we do have some recency bias. The Tucker trade and the emptiness that followed early in the offseason, they traded for Eli Morgan. Of course, it's not getting a lot of attention, but it was not getting attention because it was almost sarcastically viewed because that was the move. But now you brought up the word reliability. Well, they got a reliever who was reliable. Eli
I think
Morgan,
you make that trade now, people are a lot more interested in it.
Yes, and Eli Morgan, 1.9 ERA last year in 42 innings. He has a track record of also starting major league games. He had a 4 ERA in 2023, a 3.4 ERA in 2022. He's going to be under maybe 1.5 million. He's not a free agent until 2028. He even has a minor league option. Cody Poteet also 24 innings. Of course, Bellinger, but he has a minor league option as well. So this is part of that gamble, that playing your cards right when you have minor league options and you're trading. In Eli Morgan's case, remember at the time, Alphonse and Rosario, a lot of folks are up in arms. Alphonse and Rosario, who had a 33% strikeout rate in A-ball and batted .230. I get all the hype, but you mentioned the word reliability, and they acquired a cost-effective reliever that was just, scoffed at initially. Yeah. So
I think that would be my vision for the bullpen. I think they need another starter. If that's Rōki Sasaki, that would be amazing. That would be really wonderful news. Definitely still interested in them adding to that rotation. I think it would go a long way. Whether that's, we've discussed the trades. A lot of those rumors have died down, but you never know if they can kick back up or if new ones will surface. And, there's still some names out there on the free agent market, but that, getting a pretty short list at this point. So that's how I feel, getting to what do they need to finish off this offseason and put themselves in a good spot. Couple more arms in this bullpen, hopefully on, call it the upper end of an acquisition, whether that's via trade or free agency. Another solid starter. Top 3 in a rotation would be ideal. If they can find it.
Would you be surprised if they don't sign or trade for another starter going into the year and they use that money in the bullpen instead?
I think I would. I just feel
I'm saying top shelf starter, like a top 3 in the rotation starter, the Flaherty, Pivetta types. Would you be surprised if they don't get one of those guys? Not those 2 specifically, but in that tier.
Maybe.
I don't think I would.
I mean, at this point, I don't know. I think going into the offseason, I would have said yes.
Right. Same. Yeah. But given how we've seen the market play out, You can see Flaherty getting 80 million with those significant arm injuries. Pivetta, we'll see what happens too. If it's 1 or 2 years, and yeah, I'm cool with Pivetta.
Yeah.
But I can see a scenario where the Cubs improve their win projection enough where they keep open the possibility of acquiring one of those arms at the trade deadline.
Potentially, yeah. I think they need it. I think they're going to need it. I think if we were looking at a situation where Cade Horton, finished off the year completely healthy and we're kind of in a similar spot to Matt Shaw, where it was like he's getting in that rotation. It's just a question of what that cushion is. Maybe we'd be, I'd think about that a little differently.
Ben Brown.
But just thinking about the rotation, like I just think they need that another, similar to the kind of the bullpen, kind of like a stable, like reliable arm. And it's not a lack of confidence in the guys that the Cubs have. It's just acknowledging that there's some unpredictability there. Again, we've talked about this a lot. Like Justin Steele has been excellent the last few years. One of the biggest and most successful Cubs developmental stories in our lifetime, probably, especially on the pitching side. I mean, there's no question there. He's had injuries. He's dealt with injuries. How does his body hold up? And these things aren't always, in Texas, he stepped wrong and, misses a month. Like these things happen. Jameson Taillon, much better in 2024. Really turned it around from the start of his Cubs tenure. But where is he as he gets older in age? Where is he kind of finding himself in 2025? Shota, as we said, he was the ERA leader for a while. He was in the Cy Young mix for a while. But how does that second year look? How does he continue to adjust? How does the league adjust to him? What is that
with the rates, Wrigley Park factors, maybe normalizing?
That is right. One of those things where a lot of people, have correctly and fairly talked about how the Cubs offense maybe was better than it seemed last year. Wrigley was a tough place to play. If that goes the other way, though, like the Cubs pitchers are the ones who, if the park factors go the other direction, the Cubs pitchers and especially those who give up fly balls, like our good friend Mike, they would be the ones that would have to deal with that and figure out how to kind of adjust to that. So again, I'm extremely confident in those two guys. I have every confidence in the world in rolling with those two as your 1-2 and that being your 1-2 punch. It was very fun in the 2024 season when they were both rolling. They're not without question, though. And then you kind of move through the rotation like Javier Assad. What is his role? If he were a starter, can he be successful going more than 4 2/3 innings, every start?
With peripherals that suggests weirdness that he should not be preventing that many runs.
Yeah. Jordan Wicks coming back from injury. What does he look like? How does that all look like? There's question. And you can see how if you were able to add one of the guys we're talking about, obviously, if it was someone like Sasaki, you're not really sure where you're slotting him in or what that looks like and everything.
Number one.
Yeah, hopefully. But you can see how adding another guy in there, even it was Jack Flaherty, like who, at the contract, I may not be interested, like depending on what it is. But if you're slotting him in there, you look at that 1 through 5 and then the depth that you would have and you go, I feel good about this. Like, I feel good about this. And, maybe some guys regress, maybe some guys have a breakout season or continue getting better. You're like, yeah, this looks good. And I think they're well prepared for the challenges of a 162 game season. Without it, I think it's still set up well, but I think, again, if you're going to make the trade for Kyle Tucker, you only have him for a year. If they're not going to go all out and just sell out everything for 2025, I think you can at least position yourself better than where they currently sit, and they have that money to do it. As far as the last thing, I do want depth at third base. I would sign Alex Bregman. I would do that deal. I would figure out where Matt Shaw gets those at bats later, and I'm fine with that. And I think you can make it work. And whether that would be followed with a move like, we talked about trading Nico to Seattle for pitching or something like that, so that Matt Shaw has a clear, but fine. I'm into it. It's not like my number one priority though, but I do think they need
you see where the market develops for him too.
Sure. Yeah. But I think you need somebody that you're comfortable playing third base on a fairly regular basis in the event that Matt Shaw needs more time, or thrusting him into this position appears to be having an adverse developmental reaction. Like, you need to be prepared for that. And at present, if Matt Shaw were injured or something wasn't going well, or they get to spring training and they're like, his defense isn't there, we need more time, he's got to start the year in AAA. Who's playing third base right now? So you need some answer to that. And like, I would have been fine if it was Josh Rojas, but he's also one of those guys where it's like, meh, league average hitter against, with the splits.
I'll be honest with you. I was not into the idea. I thought he was very overrated.
Defender or whatever, but it's like, that definitely feels like the type of move that this team has made in the past, where come May, we're pulling our hair out that this guy is in the lineup every day with a, 75 WRC plus or something like that. And then it would be the same as some of these other ones have gone, where like all of a sudden over this offseason, his athleticism and defensive ability is completely gone. And we have this like shell of a guy, right? Like, with Mancini, it was like his athleticism was just gone.
Right.
So that one I didn't care so much about, but they have to address that, Brendan. Right now, you're not set up for any alternative really that is not just Matt Shaw taking that job and succeeding, basically.
Well, then the question is, how do you accomplish that? Because the free agent market isn't quite inspiring at third base. The two guys maybe that can be viewed as depth pieces, Yoan Moncada on a 1-year, here you go type situation, injury-riddled career. We know this from the White Sox last year, 45 plate appearances. In those 45 plate appearances, he had a few base hits, the year before, 2023. He had 357 plate appearances, batted .260 with a 98 WRC plus. He could be an option. If you want to go a little bit more fringy, Kevin Biggio can play third base, can play first base, can play second base, corner outfield. Last season was with 3 teams. Awful year, though, an 84 WRC plus. Batted 197, had a 285 weight on base average, but in his career is a 102 WRC plus guy. He's 29 years old, maybe a rebound. Again, as depth piece, having some guys that can play multiple positions might be attractive. For Biggio, presumably a minor league deal. For Yoan Moncada, probably pretty cheap major league deal. Those are 2 guys. Outside that, you're just kind of flipping coins. So unless it's through a trade, it's hard to see you get that value you want, which then makes me start thinking, well, maybe Bregman does make a little sense here, especially as his market starts to shrink as the opening day inches closer. And then to your point, what about Nico Hoerner? Okay, well, the Cubs do need starting pitching. You can go to Seattle, right? So it does make the wheels churn a little bit. I would not say that's likely. I think the likely outcome is you maximize Matt Shaw's value, which is a 1 to 4 win player as the range, and you use that money to shore up your pitching elsewhere, and you don't insert that financial risk by giving up Nico Hoerner's very friendly AAV and potentially Matt Shaw's extremely cheap pre-arb value. Jed Hoyer has always operated with maximizing value, and that would go against the grain, although I can see a scenario where it might make sense given their overall situation.
Yeah, so there you go. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how he finishes this off, because there is stuff that needs to be done here. So,
I mean, right now they're an 86-win team if you look at most projections. Fangraphs.
But going in with this group would be a mistake.
Well, they're not going to.
No, I know, but that's the table that we're setting here. That's like, the scene we're setting.
Like they're 50, they're 50 mil underneath the first year of the tax. Okay. Let's say you sign Hoffman or one of these relievers, 13 million down right there. So let's just, round it down to 35 million. Let's say you get Yoan Moncada, 4 million. Let's round it down again. Now you're at 30 million. Let's say you sign one of these starting pitchers. Okay. 25 AAV. Well, now you have 10 million AAV right there, or 10 million underneath the first tier tax. They may be fine with that. So what does that look like? It might look like a Nick Pivetta signing. It might look like the Hoffman signing or the Tanner Scott signing. It might look like one of those dumpster diving situations where you spread out the value in bullpen arms, but they are going to spend. And the reason that's going to happen is every year over the past several years, especially last year, they've inched towards that luxury tax. They've been right at the cusp. So there's no reason to think that when you trade for Kyle Tucker, they won't inch towards that tax like they did in the previous 2 years, where they were seriously worse on paper than what they are right now.
Yeah,
they will spend.
Well, and they have to, I understand some of the uneasiness or the impatience, or even, again, looking at giving 38-year-olds $3 million, like, and having the, like, come on, like, finish it off, make the strong moves, like, just position yourselves as the team that's winning this division outright, like, just finish it off. But I do agree with you. They have to. It doesn't make sense not to. You traded a good bit to get Kyle Tucker here. You only have him for the year, and it happens to be the same year that your president needs to make the playoffs or something, because he doesn't have a contract.
You think? I mean, you look at Jed Hoyer. You know how much money's on the table for that guy. You think he's going to stand back and not, just be aloof with everything. He himself has millions of his personal finances at stake. He's going to spend money.
What the threshold is for Tom to give him an extension or for Jed to stay with the Cubs, I don't know what that is. I can't tell you what
World Series
Tom's thinking is. But I can say, like, if I'm Jed Hoyer, you probably don't want to hit the market as a baseball executive as a guy who went 0 for 5 in opportunities with a $230-ish million payroll.
And he's getting up there in age,
not just winning the division, not playoff series wins, not World Series wins, not that, just making the playoffs.
0.
You probably don't want that.
Yep.
And now, granted, he could get, an advisor job or something like that for the rest of his life. He's secure if he wants, but if he wants this job or this job, of a similar caliber with a different team, he's got to have success in 2025. That's just what it is. There's no more runway for him after this. So does that mean he has to go sign Alex Bregman or something? No, but he needs, this has to be a solid effort from him and his front office in terms of when this team breaks camp, that they are going to get him a job. So how he finishes that off, and, how that squares with the budget that the Ricketts family and, the business side of things have given him, that's stuff that we can't really know for certain. But, going back to an earlier point that I made, like, if I were Tom at some point, like, I don't think he cares about the criticism of, like, not spending for Bryce Harper or our season tickets are too expensive. Obviously he doesn't care about that. But I do think he cares about this team winning and making the playoffs. And I also think he probably cares about the topic we discussed a little bit earlier, Brendan, which is, like, you got 5 chances to win the division over a team that I give you $100 million more to try and beat. If you can't do it in one of the 5,
then someone else
probably have to get a new president.
Yeah.
Right? That seems like a fair, for as much as we talk about Tom and want them to spend more, that does feel like a fair conclusion for him to reach.
Yeah, absolutely. We're jumping ahead. The moral of the story is they're going to spend money. How much it is, in my view,
and on who?
Who is either, are they 10 million below the first year or are they 20? That's the range you're going to operate under if I had to bet. And then once we get to July, the hope is Matt Shaw hits his ceiling or some semblance of a top overperforming projection, and everyone else is stable on the team hitting their average projections. And if that's the case, then they're going to make another splash at the trade deadline, because that means they're probably going to be pushing 90 plus, 92 plus wins if that's the case. And then if you want to think crazy, well, PCA hits his top projection, which is 4 or 5 more. Now you're pushing 95. And then those Chapman signings in 2016 become a viable, realistic option for this team. That's the hope. And they are close. They really are. They have to finalize these last few moves in the last 6 weeks, and they're in position to do it. Yes, it's a shrinking market, but there's many opportunities still on the table that allows the team to be 90 plus wins. And it's a matter of if those guys fall to Jed, or rather if Jed is willing to go out and risk some wiggle room in the luxury tax.
All right. Well, let's see what he's got for us. So we will be back with you next week. As always, appreciate your support. And let's see how Jed finishes up this offseason. A few weeks left before pitchers and catchers show up, and we kind of know what this roster looks like. But CHGO Cubs team, I have you covered if we need to do any emergency shows. Brendan and I will talk to you again next week. And as always, go Cubs.
We all silly like the mayor.